So now let's look at graphing representations to find domain and range. So domain and range, domain is the x value, and range is the y value. So domain goes from left to right, while range goes from bottom to top because it's from least to greatest value. So if domain's your x and your horizontal, the least or lowest value is from the left to the right. Range is the vertical direction, so the least or lowest value is from the bottom to the top. So it wants to know, looking at this graph, where does our function or our graph start from the left and where does it end to the right? So the farthest left our graph is here, the farthest right is here. So for the domain, that's where it's going. From, let's see, from -8 to +7. We just have to figure out, are we using brackets or parentheses? I know it's going from -8 to 7, but because it specifically has open dots, I know that we're not actually including those point values, -8 and +7, within the domain. It's everything up to the value. So because of the open dot, we're going to put parentheses. If there was no open dot there at all, we would just consider it a point included in the graph. So how about the range? The lowest point our graph is right here. The highest point is right here. So that lowest point is -5, and it goes all the way to +6. Just like with the domain, that y value of -5 has that open dot. So we're not going to include it. We're going to include everything down until -5, while as the range, or for your 6 value, I mean, because it doesn't specifically have an open dot there, that point is part of that graph, and we can include 6 as part of the range of this function. So just look to see if it specifically wants us to have an open dot there, kind of stating we're including everything up to it. But if there's no open dot there, just go ahead and say it's included, and that's when you guys use the bracket. So if we look at our next one, this is pulled from a calculator, so it's not going to show, but this really continues downward. So the domain, it doesn't necessarily look like it's going to left and right. It looks more like it's just going down, but it is slowly continuing to the left and slowly continuing to the right. So because both of those have arrows on them, again, this was pulled from a calculator, so it's not going to show the arrows, but it continues off that graph. The domain is going to be from negative to positive infinity. There is no stopping point in the left or right direction. Now for the range, remember the range is from bottom to top. So if it's coming from negative infinity, like if it's going down forever, the graph is coming from negative infinity, but it's stopping right there. What is that y value where it's stopping? The highest point this function reaches is +2. That's part of the function. We're going to include that in the range. So the only time we're using parentheses is if we have infinity, or if there's like specifically an open dot there, like we're just approaching the value. We're not actually reaching it or including it. So let's look at 2 more. 7 and 8. Now we'll look at these 2 functions in the next 2 chapters, but what we have here for number 7 is a rational function, and it's actually made up of 2 branches. So these 2 branches are kind of separated by asymptotes that cut through the center of them, and you can kind of see the dashed line if I zoom in a little bit there. But each branch is approaching these vertical and horizontal asymptotes. So if you look at it that way, from left to right, it's skipping over that vertical asymptote that goes through 4. We've got some graph on the left of it, we've got some graph on the right of it, but it is skipping that value of negative or positive 4. So how we show that is everything to the left of 4, everything to the right of 4. And we're showing that gap or that space right there at the value. So everything up to 4, we're going to skip over 4 and then keep on going. So then for the range, we've got stuff below and above the horizontal asymptote that goes through positive 3. So for the range, we want to say everything below and up to 3. We're going to skip over 3 and then keep on going to positive infinity. So that's how you kind of show sections when you're working with domain and range. 8 is similar. It's just that instead of having 2 branches, it's almost like you kind of have 1. So instead of having these asymptotes that divide it, you just have one little piece. So what we want to see is where our graph levels off in number 8. So if you're looking at this, if I try to draw a straight line here, you can kind of see that it levels off at 3, or rather negative 3. So if you guys can see that it levels off there at negative 3, that's where the limit is, or that's the highest point for this function. So for the range, it's continuing downward, so it's coming from negative infinity, but the highest point it's reaching is negative 3. We're not actually reaching it. It's almost getting to like negative 3.000001, as many zeros as possible, but it's not actually going to get to negative 3. Again, we'll look at this a little more in depth later, but then the domain, because it's continuing in the left and right direction continuously, it's just negative to positive infinity, both with parentheses there.